What is the scariest thing that ever happened to you at work? I worked as a foreman on a construction site. I saw things at work that would make a lot of people curl up into a ball and cry. But the scariest one, the crane accident. It was a 500-ton automotive crane. Absolutely brand new. We were installing reinforced concrete panels for a large office warehouse building. The crane operator's assistant was polishing the shiny aluminum deck on the crane while it was operating. He thought he was standing in a safe spot because he wasn't in the current swing zone of the crane. But then the installer suddenly needed a box with plates that was on the opposite side. So the crane turned in that direction. And the poor guy got crushed between the counterweights and the crane platform. He didn't make a single sound. The crane operator didn't even realize what happened. When one of the truck drivers noticed the poor man, it was already too late. I won't describe the details, but believe me, it was scary as heck. Worse than you can imagine. OSHA placed the blame on the deceased. He made a mistake. He wasn't supposed to be there. Even the crane company avoided responsibility because they did all the training properly and had the documents to prove it. In Section 101 of the Crane Operation Manual, it states clearly, no one may stand within the crane's rotation radius during operation. Worst of all, besides the tragedy, of course, was what happened to the crane operator. He blamed himself. But that was nonsense. The deceased man was an adult who understood the risks of his job. I worked as a manager in a large retail chain. One night, we got a call from the Los Angeles Police Department. We weren't even in Los Angeles. We were nearby, and they asked if we had an employee named John. That evening, he was working in the warehouse. And they told us that under no circumstance should we allow him to come out into the sales floor. It turned out, his uncle, under the influence of substances, had killed both of his parents and his sister, and was threatening to come after John next, all because of an inheritance worth just a few $1,000s. A few minutes after the call, local officers were already at our building. Thankfully, the uncle was caught after he crashed into a bus stop on his way to our store. Detectives arrived and broke the news to John. I have never in my life heard a scream filled with such terror and pain. And I hope I never hear anything like that again. The company kept him on the payroll, falsifying documents so he wouldn't lose his job until he was ready to return. 6 weeks later, he came back a completely different person. I work at a hospital. We had a major gas leak and had to evacuate both ER departments, adult and pediatric. Every pair of hands mattered. Even if all you could do was push stretchers, you were expected to help. Our ER can hold up to 400 people. Thankfully, we only had about 200 at the time. We evacuated people into ambulance bays, lobbies, corridors, anywhere we could move them. It took almost 2 hours to shut off the gas, and another hour to return patients to their rooms. Then we had to run around the district collecting oxygen tanks and other supplies. Thankfully, no one was hurt. But the realization that a place full of defenseless people could explode at any moment. Holy moly, that really messes with your nerves. I worked as a cashier at a liquor store. And of course, we had regulars who waited at the door before we opened at 9 a.m. They came every day, 2 or 3 times a day, and always bought the same thing. Usually a half-liter or a 1-liter bottle of the cheapest vodka. They always had exact change down to a penny. They never needed a receipt. In the morning, their hands trembled, they could barely speak, and they looked like they were about to pass out. When they came the second or third time, they were more relaxed, but their speech was slurred. Several times, people like that wet themselves at the register or fell, and then couldn't even get up. It was the saddest thing I've ever seen. It's scary to think that they're so dependent on alcohol that they can't stop or accept help. For the record, I asked my boss about it within my first week. We're not allowed to refuse customers unless they're under 21 or causing a disturbance. I hated serving those people, and I hope they eventually get help. My friend got a second job at another liquor store. He said the job was actually pretty easy. But one evening, a crying woman came in. She put a large bottle of cheap vodka on the counter and begged him, through tears, to talk her out of buying it. Otherwise, she would relapse again. He managed to convince her. But after that, he quit immediately. I don't know where you live, but in my state, Alaska, selling alcohol to someone who is already intoxicated is illegal. And the seller can even face criminal charges if that person later does something and gets arrested. as far as I know, such measures are only used in extreme cases like fatal DUIs. But still, it's in the law. I'm so darn glad I don't sell alcohol anymore. I worked in a very busy bar. One day, the assistant manager ran out of his office and told me to call security. I did it immediately. But while dialing, I glanced inside the office just for a second. It was a tiny room with a window you could easily peek through. And I saw our head chef absolutely pounding on the general manager. The manager was sitting down, covering his head with his arms. And the chef was just wailing on him like dough. Holy moly, I had never seen anyone's hands move that fast. I can't imagine how many hits the poor guy took. A few cooks were trying to open the door, but it had a keypad lock. So they just kept ramming into it, begging the chef to stop. The assistant manager ran back to open the door, giving the guys a chance to pull the chef away. He resisted for a long time. It took a lot of strength to hold him back. Security arrived. The chef was arrested and charged. Of course, he never came back to work. Honestly, this whole thing could have happened anywhere at any time. The problem started because the chef argued with the assistant manager about the schedule. The general manager stepped in, and that's when the chef lost it. He even threw an office monitor at the GM, smashing it to pieces. The manager needed stitches on his head. The whole situation lasted just a few minutes. But considering that it all happened in such a busy place, in broad daylight, gosh, it was straight up chaos. I worked as a security guard at a pier south of Boston. One day, I noticed a truck moving very strangely and looking super suspicious. It drove into hidden corners where no one should normally park. And the two people inside kept watching me like hawks. Then suddenly, the truck pulled out of the lot as if it was leaving. I sighed with relief. But right then, it made a 180-degree turn and headed straight toward my patrol car. I put my foot on the gas, ready to dodge. But the truck slowed down and pulled up next to me. The passenger door opened. A guy in a hoodie jumped out, holding a gun. I hit the gas instantly. Went flying down the road at 100 kilometers per hour, even though the speed limit there was around 60. I radioed the dispatcher, shouting that someone had almost shot me. I reached another guard post where my colleagues were. I started telling them what happened. And someone pointed behind me, like that truck over there, the one driving toward us now. I thought, no way. There's no way they caught up. I drove like crazy. The truck got closer. And on the passenger seat was my coworker, drunk out of his mind, laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. Turns out he convinced his friend to pull up in his truck and stage the whole thing as a prank. The gun was a BB gun he bought to shoot pigeons messing up his yard. I scolded him hard and said he was lucky I didn't just ram the truck or call the police and say it was self-defense. He wasn't fired because I didn't report it. I was young, didn't want to look like a snitch. So I let it go. The next day, he apologized 1,000 times. Also, apparently that same night, someone knocked out his front tooth. And I thought, well, justice served. Another coworker once gave me a ride home. On the way, someone cut him off, and he started arguing with the other driver. Eventually, the other guy blocked our path, stepped out of his car, and pulled a real gun from his waistband. Holy moly, my heart dropped. My coworker floored it and swerved through the streets to make sure we weren't being followed. And that, my friends, was the first time I came home and drank whiskey straight from the bottle. At noon, I organize events. And once, at midnight, we had around 500 drunk people in a tent that we had to evacuate to a safe location. Chaos doesn't even begin to describe it. Back at my old job, I was a security guard at a medical facility. The area had a lot of homeless people with addiction issues and mental health struggles. You get used to weird things. But one day, I was asked to remove a person who had been sitting in the restroom for an hour. I opened the door and saw him with a needle. And no, it wasn't what you might think. I'll skip the details. Let's just say his behavior was extremely strange. He spoke French the entire time, so I didn't understand a word. The nurses demanded that we escort him out. We tried. And the first thing he did was lunge at us and try to attack with the bloody needle. The nurses and doctors were screaming that he was HIV positive, meaning that if he poked me even once, I could be infected. Holy goodness, my legs almost gave out. Some of you might ask why I didn't hit him with a baton or a taser. Where I worked, none of that existed. We had 0 weapons. Technically, I wasn't even allowed to hit or kick him. Patient safety was priority number 1. So we had to find anything to protect ourselves from the needle. One of my coworkers grabbed a clipboard and used it like a shield. We wrestled the guy to the floor and immediately called the cops. I'm beyond grateful that no one was hurt. At that time, I earned only $12 an hour, and management kept claiming that having no weapons justified paying us less despite daily physical dangers. What the heck? Now I earn $12 an hour making sandwiches. I used to work at an electronics store. On Thursdays, we stayed open late. Customers didn't usually come that day, so from around 5 p.m. until closing at 9 p.m., there was only one person working the shift. The store was in a nice area with well-off middle-class residents. Usually, I was the only evening employee since I lived nearby. One evening, an angry guy walked in. He was furious because the product he bought didn't work the way he expected. The product wasn't defective, he just didn't understand its functions and assumed it was something completely different. In such cases, we couldn't offer a refund. I explained everything to him, but he only got more fired up. I told him that if he kept acting that way, I'd have to call the police. He leaned over the counter, grabbed me by the collar, pulled me toward him and hissed, "Then call them, do it." For reference, the guy was about 180 centimeters tall. I was 160 centimeters and weighed 55 kilograms. And I was only 19. It was the scariest moment of my life. I pressed the panic button under the counter. The police station was less than a minute away, so I hoped they'd come fast. At that moment, the guy released me and shoved me into the wall behind the counter. Then he climbed over the counter and pinned me against the wall, shaking me and yelling right into my face. And then finally the cops arrived. I spent the rest of the evening giving statements. I didn't have serious injuries, but I had a lot of bruises. When customers made large purchases, we had to write down their passport information for warranty purposes. After I told the manager what happened, she pulled up the guy's passport profile in the system, so the staff could recognize him and call security if he ever returned. His home address, listed in the passport, was right across the street from mine. I lived in that house for another year, and never once stepped outside without fear of running into that man. Needless to say, I didn't keep that job. I worked at a pizzeria in a very rough neighborhood. One guy kept calling all day complaining that the sauce on his pizza was too spicy. We remade the pizza and delivered it 3 times, and he was still unhappy. Finally, it was almost closing time. And when he called again, the manager told him we couldn't help him any further. If he wanted, he could come to the pizzeria himself and we'd refund him. So, right before closing, I had just finished my shift and was getting ready to leave. And this guy shows up with his pizza. He was clearly under the influence and completely out of it. We processed the refund and told him he could keep the pizza, but he insisted that we try it. He opened the box and kept repeating, "No, you have to try this pizza. Is this chili? Taste my pizza is less than #0. 5# is greater than. You gotta taste my pizza." Meanwhile, he kept poking the pizza with his finger, smearing sauce all over his hands. For the record, the sauce wasn't spicy at all. If anything, it was disgustingly sweet. None of us wanted to try that dried-up pizza that this guy kept touching with his dirty hands, so we politely refused. Then politely turned into directly, and then directly turned into telling him to leave. He took the pizza and left without a word. Silence hung between us for a moment. When he drove away, I turned to my coworker, the one I had a little crush on, and said, "Hey, want to try my pizza?" And we both giggled. The guy saw us through the window, and apparently that was enough to push him over the edge. He started circling the building in his truck, waiting for someone to go out for a delivery. When he realized we weren't stupid enough to walk outside, he rolled down the window and pointed a gun at me and my coworker. We all dropped to the floor. The waitress was crying. The manager frantically dialed 911. The psycho left before the police arrived. But that wasn't the end. The next day, he kept calling over and over again, screaming that he'd hurt us and all that terrifying stuff. Of course, we had his address from the delivery slips. The police arrested him pretty quickly. So yeah, because of me, a few people almost got arrested. All I did was offer my coworker to try my pizza. Thank you for watching this video till the end. Have you ever experienced something like this at work? I hope not. But if you have, share your story in the comments. Also check out our previous video which you'll see right here. Good luck, have a great workday, and see you soon.